All right, very good. So, hi everyone. Um, my name's Sharni Brodesky, which you all know. You've all registered for the course, and I want to introduce you a little bit to myself and why I particularly decided to run this course, because not it's not my the material was inspired by a an approach to parenting called the nurtured heart approach, which some of you have heard of, some of you know more or less about it. I was trained. I did a course in Sydney before I made Aliyat. I might just mute. Hold on a second. Okay. I did a course in Australia before I came to Israel, but I want to tell you a little bit about the lead up to me doing it, and then why, in what context I did it, and why I was so inspired by it. Because I think that, firstly, it's very important to know that I think a lot of parents, I'm not a perfect parent. I don't, claim to be, but this approach has really, really valuable principles that everyone can take into all the relationships, all of your relationships. And it's about building character, and it's about building a sense of self, which is one of the most important features in I guess emotional well-being and in healthy adulthood. And I want to, like, my specialization. I was a licensed psychologist since the year 2000, but in 2007 I became a first-time mother, and then in 2008 again. So I had two little babies. I was working and newly married, sort of, and was married in 2006. And then I decided to go back and do a master's program. And the master's was it was called a Master's of Psychotherapy. But really, what I walked into was a 3-year training program on self disorders, something that they call the disorders of the self, which you can't really find in the DSM. It's not as clearly marked. They're called all sorts of things. They could be called OCD. It could be treatment resistant depression, borderline personality disorder, avoidant or dependent personality disorders, but they're all the same. The root of the issues, according to the program that I studied in with a professor called Russell Mears, was that these are called disorders of the self. There was something that when the self was developing, there was either traumatic influences in the environment, and part of the growth of the self was stunted. And I'm telling you this is because from the back to front, because the course is going to be the opposite. But I got into this course with two little babies, being shown adults who had self disorders and that I was meant to treat. And I understood that it's got to do a lot of the time with the caregiving environment. And it kind of, how can I say it nicely? It made me panic. Okay, because, right? Can you imagine, like, here you are going into a course and you're seeing like clips of like clients with, all sorts of issues, and they're talking a lot about attachment and about how the self develops. And it doesn't, one of the things that struck me was that self isn't like your hair or your nails or your body that just grows. The self doesn't just grow. Okay, so the self, I realized it needs certain ingredients. It needs certain like emotional nutrition in the environment for a self to thrive and grow and become healthy. So a healthy self is what gives someone confidence, an ability to have empathy. So when you have a healthy self, that means you can be compassionate, which is something I guess that Judaism also talks a lot about, our chesed. It helps us regulate our emotions. It's the part of us that can develop intimacy with our partners and you know, I guess help our children develop intimacy in their relationships. It helps have healthy boundaries. So a self needs to be bounded in a certain way, even in a psychological sense. Um, you know, and basically when you have a healthy sense, you have a feeling of like contentment and personal success, right? So it's also the place where we make choices from. We make decisions, who we're going to marry, I guess. We make what career choices, all from our sense of self, right? So those those reasons of what a healthy self looks like is kind of why I panic, because here I am as a parent with this very big responsibility, right? I don't want my child or my children to I want to do my best to to prevent them developing these disorders, and yet how, like, I understood theoretically like how the attachment has to be good and secure, but I couldn't really figure out the tools, right? So, and I was struggling. Okay, so I was also just myself, like I was struggling. I probably didn't have enough sleep, and I was loaded with, you know, kind of emotional stuff through the master's program. The clients were highly emotional. They were intense. You know, and trying to integrate this information. I'm trying to parent, and it was quite overwhelming. Like a newly married and financially struggling, because it was the first time I'd worked, and I'd never financially struggled until I had two babies and I had to stop working, and I had a husband who couldn't, you know, so he was Israeli, so he was an immigrant, so all of that took time. So it was a really kind of, what can I say, I was on survival mode until one person said to me at one point, come to do this course. So I was almost too tired to go, and they really, for some reason, insisted. There's a spot that's open, you don't have to pay, just turn up. Okay, so I come to this course, which was she was a teacher, an educator, and she was from, and she had 13 children. She lived in Melbourne, and she took this course with Howard Glasser in America, who's the founder of this course, and she was full of energy and full of inspiration, and she gave us this amazing course, which I basically cried through the whole thing. I was very like, I don't know what the word is, but it was so healing, and it was so matching, kind of, it was exactly what I was looking for, because it matched theoretically what I was learning in my master's program, but it was a set of tools that was quite simple, but not simple. Simple in the fact that you could just get it. You didn't have to think about it. And it really just, it was very evidence-based, just like my course was. And it was really matching the theory. And it was well thought through, thought perfectly designed to give children not only a sense of self, but inner wealth, which is kind of like a well nourished inner world, which is exactly kind of, you know, what we're aiming for when, you know, when we're raising children to have healthy emotional well-being. So I gave it a go, and here I am. So I want to just say, I do believe that if you put the tools to practice, that throughout the course you will see transformation. I could say that. I also want to say, in terms of expectations, I think at one stage in my life I was kind of looking for a kind of a family that looked like some ideal family, right? But what I realized is where my family is now and where I am now, it's not a perfect family, and the dynamics are not perfect, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on. But in terms of growth, and in terms of a structure, and in terms of like really knowing, like, how do you say, like having a really good map and really seeing what my children need, I think my expectations are much more healthy and set more to where my family is at. So I want to say that, because wherever your family is at and where they're at, they can grow wherever they're at. And a big part of that is, allowing, or how do you say, adjusting our expectations to match where we're at, which is fine wherever we are. Everyone struggles. So I think that it's really important that we, have it's not realistic expectations. It's just it is realistic. It's I want your children to thrive and to live up to their potential, but we don't always know what that looks like. It doesn't look like the next family or the other family, or it's going to be unique, each one to our own families. So with all of that as an introduction, I want to start with an exercise, and I call it an energy exercise. So because this approach, it's all about, we're going to find out why it's about energy. So what I wanted to do is just to think back, maybe today or in the last few days, and I want you to think about, this is called, did I tell you it's an exercise in energy math. Okay, so I hope everyone's good at adding up. And if you have like a little piece of paper, just because I want you to write down a few numbers, that would be good. Okay, but it's really not that tricky. So the first thing I want you to think, if you have a particular child that you're coming, does everybody have like one child? How do we do this? I want to see like one child in mind, or the family in general. So the first, I just want to see who's just here for one main child. And who's who's here just in general for the family? Two. Okay, one. Okay. All right. So both. Okay. Okay. So with the people who have both, it's fine. You can do it with both. That it's kind of easy to focus this on one child who, or teenager. Okay, it's like this. I'm going to ask you how many times you praised your child, let's say in one day. That's number one. And try to remember, this is like, so just, it might take a few minutes just to get clearer. The event, my child finished her math homework and showed me, or my child put a plate in the kitchen sink, or she said she hung out her laundry, or whatever. It could be, I don't know, like she just woke up and she looked nice, or he looked good. So any kind of praise. So you write like down number one, dressed well, then next to the example, you write, this is maybe a new thing for us to become aware of, but like, how much energy did you give them in that praise? Like, so how intense was it? A 1 being yeah, and a 10 being like a strong woo. Okay, so like, so you're gonna end up with a score adding up how many, each praise and the intensity, like right, so 4 and a 5 and a 3, so that I did 3 praises with these amounts, and that's my answer. So I'll give you just, try to just be more spontaneous, like with the, it's more intuitive how strong. Okay, so when you're ready, just wave your there's no guilt, no judgment, by the way, here. It's just we're not reporting on it. It's just a personal. Okay, anyone guess what the next exercise is? Okay. How many times did you give your child negative attention when they did something wrong, and rate the size of it, the intensity from a 1 to 10? So, I mean, also it depends on the ages, some kids are more prone to that. I don't know. Certain age ranges. And I'm just going to say, like, even if you have higher positives than negatives, a lot of people who come to parenting courses have more negatives than positives. It's just sometimes, they want to change the way. So that's what I would expect. Anyone have like more positives than negatives? Good. I mean, and I don't want anyone to feel, I don't want to, I'm not shaming anyone for having more negatives than positive. Okay. Because being honest about these things, sometimes, I'm trying to think myself. I've been working all day, so that's cheating. I've been out of the house. But some of my days. Okay. And then the last question is, so that's not the chidush here. So the other next question is, let's take a look at what feedback you gave your children when they weren't doing anything wrong. So they weren't doing anything good, and they weren't, so like the neutral kind of moments. So can you do the same with it? I know that sounds like the rest of the day, but like if you did you talk to them, and how much attention did they get when they were just not doing anything good or bad? Is there an opportunity here to give more relationship to them at that time? Okay, so that's just a question because we're gonna explain a bit more. I'm gonna get into that, but first I want to just talk a little bit to you about the nurtured heart approach, because it really hones into neutral spaces, by the way, into when children are not doing anything wrong. And basically, he's a clinical psychologist from Tucson, I think it's called Tucson, Arizona, and he was asked to help with children, like to see them in therapy or as a psychologist, all these children that were doing really, really bad, like at school, and they were, suspended, and, not a lot of hope left for them, not a lot of options. So I guess he became creative in how to help them, and then he saw that they were responding to certain things that he was doing and saying, and he created this approach and he put it in the schools. He trained a lot of schools, I don't know, thousands maybe of schools in the States have programs where the teachers have been trained with the nurtured heart approach. And what they found, which is very interesting, is that the violence, like in the lower socioeconomic schools where there's a poverty and there's a lot of violence and a lot of suspensions and these kinds of things going on in those schools in the inner city areas, they found the violence went down significantly. Okay, that's, to me, again, it's not that surprising. Someone's getting attention or whatever. But what's interesting is the academics go up. So it's not just that, that their marks went up. They also, in some of these schools, had to open up gifted classes, because some of the kids who were misbehaving were actually gifted kids. Special ed went down. So the question is, getting violence down, a school could do that in I don't know, lots of ways. They could be tougher, whatever. But why here are the academics going up? Why kids succeeding more? That's sort of, to me, is a very interesting kind of outcome, because it's not just I guess the idea is that only is possible really when you have a transformation program where kids are actually transforming from the inside. They're not just being told, if you don't, you'll be in jail. Your next step is boot camp and there's threats. This is something that, they're tapping into in themselves after being treated in a certain way, right? So the program, I guess, is designed to wire children for a purposeful, meaningful life, where they're making wise choices and they're more enlightened, really. So a behavior management program, often, generally in schools and maybe even in families, they often do the opposite. So they'll often they don't necessarily deal with the root of why a child is repeating a negative behavior. But this approach celebrates children's decisions when they're not doing anything wrong. So they don't wait for a child to do something wrong and then go, whoa, kid, like, what are you doing? That's a lot of energy that you give a kid when they do something wrong. And some children, they've come from maybe very neglected homes, so that's better than what they're getting, right? This is what was happening. And any truth, when you look at evidence-based work, and something's working for like a very difficult population, you can apply it across the whole population. Like, that's how I see it. Like, if there's something true that's working in those populations, for sure it can be working in something is going on inside, a person, and what is that that's causing them to transform. So that the program redefines, I guess, social emotional difficulties, behavioral challenges as energy challenges. It's another way of looking at it. Another way of saying energy is relationship. So they look at the relationship as the commodity in most in that it's energy is the ultimate commodity that relationships run on. So think about it like from a personal point of view. Say you're working and you are working on a project and you hand it in to your boss. What happens if your boss kind of just notices what you didn't do well? Like, what happens if he doesn't give you any feedback at all and there's silence, you know? And what, and what happens if he takes his time and says, look, I'm going to read this really carefully. I know you've been working on it really hard and I know that you're capable and I'm really looking forward to reading it, and give me a few days. And then he reads it and he's like, texts you in the middle, I like what I'm seeing so far, right? This is looking great. Yeah, it's a very different feeling, right? That you get because someone's giving you energy, someone's giving you recognition, someone's involving themselves with you, someone's connecting, right? So it's very different to have silence. So you've sent it in, you've pressed send, and like 3 days later you haven't heard anything on this project that you worked really hard on. So when you rated yourselves when you guys rated yourselves with the energy in the math, what sort of constitutes energy in relationships? How did you give away your energy, in what form? So children need, when I say children, of course, children are people and we're all people and we all have inner child as inner children, but children specifically like need energy more than anything, okay, and will go to great lengths to get it if they need it. So some children, we're going to distinguish types of children, but there are some children, it's like there are some children that run on less energy and some that just need more. It's just a constitution thing, just how they come, personality. But sometimes if they need a big dose of energy, sometimes they will go and get it in a negative way if they can't get it in a positive way. They'll just do what it takes to get that, right? So that's why sometimes a child will repeat, a bad behavior, because every time you respond to it, you respond in such a strong way that's rewarding them in a way. So I know this is a terrible example, and I always say that before I say this, but in the psychological research, they say that like when you have had someone that's grown up in more of an emotionally abusive or even physically abusive household, those kids end up doing better than kids that come from neglected households. And I like in my work, in my clinic, working with neglect is harder than working with them. Sometimes they come together, but when I when I see people who they say, oh, there wasn't really anyone who raised their voices at home too much, and it was a pretty normal, but they were emotionally neglected. It's a totally different thing. It's a totally different thing. It's much harder to anyway, it's not a nice example, but it's to do with energy, okay? Because it's like relationship is what the self needs to develop. We talked about self in the beginning. It's really where the, how do you say, the early connections in the brain and all of that start developing. So okay, so I know that's a bit of but it's more of an extreme example, but really shows you how important relationship, is. So over the course of the next 5 weeks, we will learn to distribute our energy towards our children through 7 interventions, and I've given you a handout of the 7 interventions, each one building upon the previous level. And so we start at the very, like if it's a pyramid that goes up, so we have to start at the base, and I'll talk about that intervention tonight.